"Stay in the East Wing until you learn your place," said Gideon Harcourt, Duke of Brackenhall, and he did not trouble to look at his wife when he said it. He heard the small sound her breath made, not a sob. A pause, as though she had been about to speak and had decided, in that half-second, that speaking would cost more than silence. Then the whisper of wool against stone as she turned, and the sound of her footsteps going away down the long gallery, unhurried even until the dark swallowed them. He stood alone in the great hall of his ancestors on the first night of his marriage and told himself that he had done what was necessary. He had been sold, after all. The debt his father left behind had been bought up by a Bristol shipping man named Ashcombe, and Ashcombe had wanted one thing only for it, and that thing was a title for his daughter. The papers had been signed in a lawyer's office in Chancery Lane, while rain ran down the windows. Gideon had not chosen her. He had not chosen any of it, and a man who is not permitted to choose, he had reason, may at least choose the terms of his surrender. So, the East Wing, 12 cold rooms above the old orangery, with their own stair and their own door to the kitchen garden. She might have them. He would keep the rest. He expected her at breakfast. He had prepared for it, the cool nod, the folded newspaper, the exquisite indifference he had rehearsed in his head like a duellist rehearsing a line of engagement. He came down at 8. The table was laid for 2. She did not come. He waited until the coffee went cold, and then he told himself he had not been waiting. Her name was Marianne. He knew that much, and he knew that she was 23, and that she had a way of holding her chin very slightly lifted that some might have called pride, and that he, on their wedding day, had decided to call insolence. He knew nothing else. It had not seemed necessary to know anything else. A week passed. He rode the boundaries, met his steward, read the accounts of a bad harvest, and did not see her. He had ordered her to the East Wing. It did not occur to him, for those first days, that she might actually stay there. On the 9th day, coming in from the stables through the kitchen passage, because the rain had made a bog of the front court, he heard her voice. He stopped in the dark of the corridor with his gloves in his hand. She was in the still room, and she was saying, quite calmly, "No, you must let it steep the full night, and then the linen must be scalded, or it will do more harm than good. Show me your hands, Betsy, there. That is what comes of lye and no tallow. Come to me Thursday, and I will give you something for it." A girl's voice, shy, said something he could not catch. "Then bring your mother too," said the Duchess of Brackenhall. "Thursday. I am always there." He went up the back stair without letting himself be seen, and he could not have said why. Winter came down on Brackenhall like a hand closing. He was much in London that season, and he told himself it was business, and it was business, and it was also that his own house had begun to feel like a room in which someone had stopped speaking to him. When he came back in February, the drive was mended. He noticed it before he noticed anything else. The ruts that had swallowed a wheel every spring were filled and rolled, and there was fresh gravel from the lodge to the bridge. He asked Hobbs, his steward, who had ordered it. "Her Grace, your Grace." Hobbs did not look up from the ledger. "She put it to the tenants at Michaelmas that if the parish would haul the stone, the estate would find the labour, and she found the labour out of the poor fund, and the men worked it in the frost when there was nothing else for them to do. It cost your lordship £11. Gideon stood very still. "The poor fund," he said, "has not been touched in 9 years. It is touched now, your Grace. It is also somewhat larger than it was." He said nothing. Hobbs, who had served his father and had a countryman's genius for silence used as a weapon, turned a page. That evening he walked, without deciding to, down the long gallery to the door of the East Wing. It was an old oak door, and it had never been locked in his lifetime, and it was not locked now. Beneath it came a line of light. He raised his hand. He stood there with his hand raised and his signet ring catching the candle he carried, and he thought about what he would say. He was the Duke of Brackenhall. He owed no explanation to any living soul. He might open that door as he might open any door in his own house, and she would rise, and she would be very correct, and she would wait to be told what he wanted, and he did not know what he wanted. He lowered his hand and went back to his own rooms, and he sat before a fire that gave no warmth, and it seemed to him that the house had become a country in which he held the title and she held the ground. The rest of the year taught him the shape of that country. He learned that the school had been opened, not built. His grandfather had built it, and his father had let it fall to nettles. But open, the roof patched, the chimney swept, and a curate's daughter from Hexley installed at 16 shillings a quarter to teach the letters to whatever came in out of the fields. He learned this because he rode past it in April and heard, through a mended window, 30 small voices reciting the alphabet in the ragged unison of the newly instructed. And he pulled up his horse and sat in the lane for a full minute like a man who had lost his way in a country he had been born in. He learned that when the fever went through Nether Brack in the summer, the Duchess of Brackenhall went with it, into cottages he had never entered, carrying vinegar and thin broth and a satchel of dried yarrow and feverfew out of the herb garden she had dug up behind the orangery with her own hands, and 2 under-gardeners who would not hear a word said against her. 6 died, 19 did not. The rector wrote a letter to the county paper praising the piety of the house of Brackenhall, and Gideon read it at his own breakfast table, alone, and set it down, and found that his hands were unsteady. He learned that she rose at 5. That she kept the accounts of the poor fund in a ledger bound in worn brown leather, and that she balanced them to the farthing, and that the farmers had begun to call her, without irony, Madam. He learned all of this the way a man learns of a distant war, by report. She asked him for nothing. That was the thing that undid him, slowly, the way water undoes stone. Not a gown, not a carriage, not a shilling that did not go straight out again into a roof or a coffin or a boy's apprenticeship in Hexley. She sent him each quarter a fair copy of the poor fund accounts in her own clear hand, and beneath the final figure she wrote, always, submitted for your Grace's approval, M. Harcourt. He never wrote back. He never once wrote back. It became a kind of horror to him that he had never once written back, and by the time he understood that it was a horror it had gone on so long that to break it would be to confess it. 2 years, then 3. He saw her perhaps a dozen times in 3 years, and each time by accident, and each time it undid a stitch in him. Once across the kitchen garden at dusk, kneeling in the black earth with her sleeves pushed back, and she looked up and saw him at the gate, and she rose and made him a curtsy, a perfect, unhurried, entirely correct curtsy with soil on her hands, and waited. He said, "Do not let me disturb you," and she said, "Your Grace," and knelt back down, and he stood there for some while and then went in. Once on the stair, her arms full of blankets, and she stood aside to let him pass, pressed against the cold wall to give him room, and he passed, and heard himself say nothing. Once at the Christmas audit, when the tenants came up to the house with their rents, and he sat at the long table with Hobbs, and the men came in one by one, and every last one of them, before he spoke a word of money to the Duke, turned first to the doorway where she stood in a grey wool gown 3 winters old, and said, "Madam," not to insult him, that was the intolerable part. It never once occurred to them that it might insult him. It was simply that she was the person in that room who had come to their houses. He sat there in his fine coat and watched his own people love his wife, and he understood, with the cold clarity of a man reading his own sentence, that he had banished her from a place she had never wanted, and she had walked out into the rest of his life and taken it, entire, without ever raising her voice. That night he drank more than he was accustomed to, and he went down the long gallery again, and this time he did not stop at the oak door. He opened it. The east wing was warmer than the rest of the house. That was the first thing. She had got the flues cleared and the fires laid with wood the tenants brought her, and the passage smelled of dried lavender and beeswax and something medicinal and clean. There were shelves where there had been none, and on the shelves were jars, and on the jars were labels in her hand. And at the far end of the passage a door stood open on a small room where a single tallow candle burned, and she sat at a plain deal table with the brown ledger open and a pen in her hand. She looked up. She did not startle. She rose and she put down the pen, and she folded her hands, and she waited to be spoken to, exactly as she had waited on the first night of their marriage. "You have made yourself useful," he said. It came out wrong. It came out like an accusation, when what he had meant, God help him, was something else entirely. "Yes," said Marianne. "There was a great deal to do. The tenants call you madam. They may call me what they like. They pay their rents to you." He stood in the doorway of a room in his own house, and could not think of a single thing to say that was not a lie or a surrender. The candle guttered. Her gown was grey, and the cuffs of it were worn to shine, and she was the Duchess of Brackenhall, and she had not asked him for so much as a length of ribbon in 3 years. You might, he said at last, have come to me, if you wanted anything. And Marianne Harcourt looked at him with a steadiness that went through him like a blade going in between 2 ribs, without pain, and said, Your Grace told me to stay in the East Wing until I learned my place. A small pause. I have learned it. He went out. He did not remember going out. He remembered standing in the gallery afterwards with his back against the panelling and his heart going like a hunted thing, and the candle burnt down in his hand until the wax ran over his signet ring, and he did not feel it. He began that winter to do a thing he had never done in his life. He began to watch, to summon, not to command, not to send word by a footman that her Grace was expected. That would have been easy, and it would have been the old sin wear a new coat. He watched. He rose early because she rose early. He took to riding out at 7, and if his road happened to carry him past the school as the smaller ones were coming up the lane with their hands in their sleeves against the cold, that was the road, and a man may ride his own roads. She was there most mornings. She did not teach. She had not the schooling for it, having been a shipping man's daughter with a governess and a good deal of common sense. But she came to see that the fire was lit, and that the ones who had walked 3 miles had something warm before they sat down. He watched her put a boy's frozen hands between her own and rub them, briskly, the way one would with a spaniel, and say something that made the boy laugh and send him in. He watched from the top of the lane on a good horse, in a coat that had cost more than the schoolmistress earned in 4 years, and he understood that he had never in his life made anyone laugh like that. In February he sent for Hobbs and said, The East Wing, what does it want? Hobbs, to his eternal credit, did not smile. Want, Your Grace? The roof over the orangery end. There's a stain on the ceiling of the passage the size of a cartwheel. What does it want? Lead, Your Grace. And a man 3 weeks. Do it. Do not tell her it came from me. Hobbs looked at him then, for a long moment, with the flat pale eyes of a man who had watched this family for 40 years. As Your Grace pleases, he said, though she'll ask who paid, and she'll not stop asking, and I have never in 3 years found it possible to lie to her. Then tell her the truth, said Gideon, if she asks. But do not tell her before she asks. She asked. Hobbs told her, and she sent footman a folded half-sheet of paper on which was written in that clear hand, The roof is mended. I am obliged to Your Grace. The cost is entered in the estate book, not the poor fund, as it is a repair to your house. M. Harcourt. He read it 11 times. There was nothing in it. There was less than nothing in it. He put it in the drawer of his writing desk where his father's watch was, and he sat down, and he took up a pen, and for the first time in 3 years and 4 months he wrote to his wife. He wrote 9 drafts. He burnt 8. What he sent was this. Madam, the poor fund accounts have been submitted to me these 3 years, and I have never once acknowledged them. That was ill done. They are exact, and the work behind them is a great deal more than exact. I do not ask you to come to my table. I ask only leave to send the accounts back with my approval written on them, as they deserved from the first. Brackenhall. There was no reply for 4 days. On the 5th, the quarterly ledger came up to him as it always did, and beneath the final figure in her hand was the usual line, Submitted for Your Grace's approval, and beneath that smaller, freshly inked, Your Grace's approval is welcome. It was never required, but it is welcome. It was, he thought, the coldest kindness ever done him, and he would have given his right hand for another line of it. So he learned the length of the road he had to walk. He began to go among his own people. It was at first a humiliation so complete that he could taste it. He rode down to Netherbracken March and dismounted at a cottage where the thatch had gone green and knocked at the door, and the woman who opened it went white to the lips and dropped a curtsy so violent she nearly fell, and behind her he heard a man's voice say, low and fast, God save us. What have we done? That's what he was in his own village. He was the thing that came when something had been done. He stood in the doorway of that cottage with his hat in his hand, and he said nothing. You have done nothing. The thatch wants replacing before the autumn. I have come to see it. They gave him a stool by the fire and would not sit themselves. They answered him in monosyllables. It went on for the better part of an hour, and it was the worst hour he had spent since his father's funeral, and when he rose to go the woman said suddenly at the door, "Madam had a look at our Tom's chest in the winter. He'd have gone else." "Yes," said the Duke of Brackenhall. "I know. He replaced the thatch on 11 cottages that spring." He did not tell her. He drained the low field at Hollowgate that had drowned 3 crops in 5 years, and he did not tell her. He sat twice a week in the estate office with the door open and heard the tenants out one by one, and slowly, over months, the whiteness went out of their faces when they came in, and by midsummer a man named Pardoe argued with him for 20 minutes about a boundary hedge and got the better of it, and went away. And Gideon sat looking at the closed door with an expression that would have astonished anyone who knew him in London. He did not go to the East Wing. He had learned that much, that a man who has commanded a woman to stay away does not get to command her back, but he began to leave things. A book, once a treatise on the cultivation of medicinal herbs, sent up from a bookseller in Holborn, left with the footman, no note, came back to him 3 weeks later with a slip of paper marking a page on the propagation of comfrey, and on the slip, in her hand, "This is the best of it. The rest is nonsense written by a man who has never had soil under his nails." She had not thanked him. She had argued with him. He read the whole book that night to find out where the man had gone wrong and found, to his astonishment, that she was right, and that he had spent 4 hours in the middle of the night reading about comfrey in order to have something to say to his own wife. Then, in the autumn, the child of a labourer at Hollowgate was crushed under a cartwheel, not killed, the leg broken in 2 places, and they carried him not to the surgeon at Hexley but up the drive to the East Wing door, because that was where you went. And Gideon came out of the estate office at the noise and found his wife in the courtyard with her sleeves pushed back and blood on the grey wool gown, saying, "Lay him down." Not there. Someone hold his shoulders. He knelt in the gravel and held the boy's shoulders. She did not look at him. She looked at the leg. She said, "Hold him," and he held him, and the boy screamed, and she set the bone with hands that did not shake, and afterwards she sat back on her heels in the dirt of his courtyard and pushed the hair out of her eyes with the back of her wrist. And only then did she look at the man kneeling opposite her. It was the first time in 4 years that they had been in the same place doing the same thing. "Thank you," said Marianne. "He is a heavy lad," said Gideon, and his voice did not come out as he intended. She almost smiled. It was not a smile. It was the ghost of one, the smallest possible movement, and it went through him like the first warmth after a night in the snow, that particular pain which is not pain, but the blood coming back. "He is," she said. "Send someone for his mother." He sent someone for his mother. He stood in his own courtyard with a boy's blood on his sleeve and gave orders. For 1/4 of an hour, they worked together like 2 people who belonged to the same house. Then it was done, and she rose, and she thanked him again, and she took up her satchel and went in through the east door, and it shut, and he was standing in the gravel alone. He went to London in November because his sister, the Countess of Marle, had written him 4 letters and threatened a 5th, and because he could not bear the house. His sister was a woman of great warmth and no discretion, and she took one look at him across her drawing-room and said, "Gideon, you look like a man being eaten. I am well. You are not well. You are thin, and you have taken to going about the country like a bailiff, and Marle says you have spent £1,100 on drainage. Where is your wife?" He looked at the fire. "Gideon, at Brackenhall." "Yes, she is always at Brackenhall. She has been at Brackenhall for 4 years, and she has never once been to London, and she has never once been presented, and there are people in this town who say she is mad, or deformed, or that you keep her under lock and key, and I have defended you, and I would very much like to know why." He said, "Because I told her to." The room was very quiet. On the first night, he said, "Of my marriage, I told the Duchess of Brackenhall to stay in the East Wing until she had learned her place. She has stayed there. She has run the poor fund and opened the school and nursed the fever and mended my drive and set a boy's leg in my own courtyard. And she has never once asked me for anything, and she calls me your Grace, and she has learned her place, Louisa. She has learned it perfectly, and it is not beside me." His sister sat down very slowly. "Then unlearn it," she said. "How? I do not know. But if you do not, I think you will die of it, and so will she, in the quieter way that women die of such things, and I shall never forgive you." She was crying, which she did easily, and it did not make her wrong. "Gideon, what is she like?" And the Duke of Brackenhall opened his mouth to answer his sister, and found that he could speak for an hour about what his wife did, and could not say what she was like, because he had never asked her a single question in his life. He went home the next morning. He rode through the night at the end of it, and came up the mended drive at dawn with the horse blown, and the low winter sun coming through the mullion glass of the east wing, and he did not go to his own rooms. He went to the oak door, and he knocked. She opened it herself. It was scarcely past 6. She had a shawl over the grey gown, and her hair was down in a plait over one shoulder, and she looked at him standing there in his travelling coat with the mud of 2 counties on him, and she did not ask what he wanted. She stood back from the door. "You have ridden all night," said Marianne. "There is coffee." He came in. He sat at the plain deal table in the room with the ledger and the jars, and she poured him coffee in a thick kitchen cup, and he held it and did not drink it. "What is your favourite season?" he said. She stopped, with the pot in her hand. "Your Grace, your favourite season, whether you like music, whether you were happy in Bristol, what your mother was called." He set the cup down because his hand was not steady. "I have been married to you for 4 years, and I do not know one of these things, and yesterday my sister asked me what you were like, and I could not answer her, and I rode 200 miles to ask you, and now that I am here I find that I have no right to a single one of the answers." The silence went on a long while. Outside, the winter sun came up over the park and lay along the floorboards in a long pale bar. Marianne set down the pot. She sat, which she had not done in his presence in 4 years, and she folded her hands on the ledger. "Autumn," she said. "My mother was Anne. I like music very much, and I have not heard any since I came here. And no, I was not happy in Bristol. My father wanted a coronet on the family plate, and he bought one, and he told me on the morning of my wedding that I was to make myself agreeable and be grateful." She lifted her chin, that same fraction he had once called insolence. "And then your Grace told me to go to the East Wing until I learned my place, and I found, in the end, that it suited me better than being grateful." Marianne, it was the first time he had said it aloud. He heard it land in the room like something dropped. "I have mended the thatch," he said. "At Nether Brack and Hollowgate and the Row, I drained the low field. I sit in the office twice a week, and I hear them out, and I let Pardo get the better of me about a hedge because he was right. I have read your book about Comfrey. I have approved the accounts. And none of it is a courtship, and I know it is not, because a man does not court his wife by doing the work he was born to do and neglected for 9 years. It is only that I could not come to you empty-handed, and I had nothing in my hands, and it has taken me a year to make anything worth carrying." She looked at him. Her eyes were grey, and he had not known that either. "And what do you want, Gideon?" His own name. It went through him. "You," he said, "at my table, in my hours, in every room of this house. Not because I summon you. I will never summon you again as long as I live." "No," said Marianne. He had known it. He had known it all the way from London. It still took the air out of him. "Not yet," she said more gently than he deserved. "Understand me. I am not punishing you. I have not the strength to spare for punishing anyone. But I have built a life out of the rooms you left me, and it is mine. And it is the only thing in this world that is mine, and if I walk out of it because you have come to the door in a fine coat and said a beautiful thing, then it was never mine at all. It was only ever a place I was kept until you wanted me." She said it without heat. "I will not be wanted. I would rather be useful. Then tell me what to do. I do not know that there is anything you can do." "Then I will do it anyway," said the Duke of Brackenhall, "and I will go on doing it. And you may look out of that window for the next 30 years and see me at it." And he stood, and he bowed to her, and he went out. He did not stop coming. That was the whole of his answer, in the end, and it was the only one she would have believed. He came at 7 in the morning to the school with a load of coal in a cart he had ordered himself. He came to the still room in March with a case of instruments from a maker in Wigmore Street, because he had seen her set a bone with a kitchen splint. He came on a Tuesday in May, with a spinet on a wagon and 4 men to carry it, and he had it put in the long gallery, and he said, "It is not in the east wing, because I will not furnish your prison. It is in the gallery, which is neither yours nor mine, and it is yours to use or to leave standing." She left it standing for 11 days. On the 12th he heard, from 3 rooms away, someone playing very badly and very steadily and with tremendous obstinacy, and he sat down where he was, on a step of the great stair, and put his head in his hands and listened for an hour. They began to be that summer, something for which the language of his class had no word, not lovers, not strangers. He would find her in the orchard, and they would argue about the poor fund for 40 minutes. She wanted a fund for widows, he wanted the school extended. They compromised badly, and both of them knew it. She began to say his name. She began to sit down when he came into a room instead of standing. Once, walking back from Hollowgate in the rain under one umbrella, because they had only one between them, her hand brushed his and neither of them moved it away, and they walked the last half-mile like that, not speaking, with the rain coming down on the wall of her shoulder and his. And he thought that he had never in his life been so afraid of a mile ending. At the door she took her hand back and looked at him, and there was something in her face that had not been there in 4 years, and she said, "Good night." Gideon went in. He stood in the rain a long time. In September the county came to Brackenhall. It was the harvest ball which his mother had held and his father had abandoned, and which he had ordered reopened, and half the great houses of 3 counties came up the mended drive to see for themselves the mad duchess who was kept in a wing. He knew what they had come for. He had spent his life among these people, and he knew the exact temperature of their curiosity. Lady Renford said, over the soup with her eyes bright, "And is her Grace to appear?" We had begun to think she was a legend. "She has not been invited," said Gideon. There was a delighted little intake of breath along the table. "That is to say," he went on, "she has not been summoned. My wife does not attend by summons. She will come or not come as she chooses. And I have asked her as any man asks a woman he hopes will honor him, and I have no more right than that." Nobody knew what to say. Lady Renford laughed uncertainly, and looked to see who else was laughing. He rose. He stood up in the great hall of Brackenhall under the chandelier his grandfather had hung, with 200 candles burning in the crystal, and the whole county's faces turned up to him, and he put down his glass. "You have come to look at her," he said. "You may as well hear it from me, and save yourselves the trouble of guessing. On the first night of my marriage I told my wife to go and stay in the east wing until she learned her place. I said it because I was angry at being bought, and I was too great a coward to be angry at the men who bought me, so I was angry at the woman they sent. That is the whole of it. There is no other reason, and there never was. She went. And in the years since, without 1 shilling of my help or 1 hour of my company, she has opened the school at Netherbrack that my father let fall down. She has kept the poor fund, which had not been opened in 9 years, and doubled it, and balanced it to the farthing. She nursed the fever in a village I had never entered. Every mended roof on this estate is mended because she shamed me into it, and she never once said a word to shame me, which is how it was done. You will hear, in London, that the Duke of Brackenhall keeps his Duchess out of sight. That is true. I kept her out of sight. It is the only thing I have ever done that I am ashamed of past bearing, and I will not have it whispered when it can be said aloud. He looked down the long table at all of them. Her name is Marianne. She is the best thing in this house, and every good thing that has come to this land in 4 years came from her hand and not from mine, and I have no more claim on her than any of you, and rather less. The hall was entirely silent, and into that silence, at the far end, the doors opened. She had not dressed for them. That was the thing he remembered afterwards, all his life. She came down the length of the hall in dark green silk that his sister had sent her and had not put a jewel on her, and she came alone, with her chin at that fractional lift, past the Renfords and the Marles and the Bishop of the diocese, and she did not look at one of them. She looked at him. The candles in the crystal went on burning. Somewhere a chair scraped, and nobody sat down again. She came to the head of the table and stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the plait of her hair pinned up and the 2 strands escaping it, and she said quietly, so that only he heard it, "You did not summon me." "No," said Gideon. His voice had gone. "I never will." "I know." Her eyes were bright and her mouth was not steady. That is why I came." He held out his hand, palm up, open, sucking, in front of the whole county and God and the 200 candles. And the Duchess of Brackenhall put her hand in her husband's, and closed her fingers and stood at his side because she had chosen to. He would not, afterwards, be able to say who applauded first. He thought it was old Pardo's landlord, and then Louisa weeping, and then all of them, and did not matter, because he was looking at his wife's hand in his own and thinking that he had waited 4 years to feel the weight of it. They danced. She danced badly, having never been taught, and he did not care, and he told her so, and she laughed out loud, that laugh he had watched her give to a boy with frozen hands at a schoolhouse door in the cold, and he had never heard anything in his life he wanted more to hear again. Late, when the carriages had gone and the candles had guttered down in the crystal to stubs, he walked to the length of the long gallery, and they stopped, both of them, at the oak door of the east wing. Neither spoke for a moment. "I do not ask you to give it up," he said at last. "The still room. The ledger, the school. It is yours. It will always be yours, and I will have the door taken off its hinges tomorrow if you like, so that no man may ever shut it again." Marianne looked at the door and then at him, and she said, "Leave the door. I am fond of it." Then she reached up, slowly, and laid her hand along his jaw, the first time she had ever touched his face, and he shut his eyes because he could not bear it. "But I shall not be sleeping behind it." She took his hand and led him, not into the east wing, but out of it, down the gallery, towards the warm end of the house. The last candle burned out behind them. They were 41 years married. She never did give up the ledger. It sat, worn brown leather, on the table in the room they came to share, and the poor fund of Brackenhall became a byword in 3 counties. She was called Madam to the end of her life by men who would have gone into the fire for her. He learned to play the spinet badly in order to be laughed at. There were sons, and there was a daughter who dug in the herb garden with soil to her elbows. And Gideon Harcourt, who had been a cold man and had cured himself of it at a cost he thought cheap at any price, would sometimes stop in the long gallery when he was old, at the oak door that had never been locked, and stand a moment with his hand on the wood, because he had told her once to stay behind it until she learned her place. And she had learned it, and it was beside him, and she had walked to it, in green silk, past the whole staring county on her own 2 feet, because she chose to.